Everyone. If you can hear me. So our first speaker today is Rahele Kafieh. She is an assistant professor of bioengineering at Durham University. She serves as an EPSRC Women in Engineering Ambassador, and her research focuses on artificial intelligence for biomedical image and signal processing, with a focus on early disease diagnosis, home-based imaging solutions for elderly populations, and AI-driven referral systems connecting community care to hospitals. So her talk today is entitled Empowering Women's Health, AI-driven early detection of multiple sclerosis through eye imaging. So I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction and thank you for inviting me here. I'm super excited to present my works and if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. Could you just let me know if everything is okay and you can see my... Okay, fantastic. So, just to start with, the title of this presentation is Empowering Women's Health, AI-driven early detection of multiple sclerosis through eye imaging. As being kindly introduced, I'm Rahele Kafieh, Assistant Professor of Bioengineering at Durham University. And I would like to start with first introducing the disease itself, that is multiple sclerosis, that we are going to concentrate on it. And the reality is that in healthy people's nervous system, we have two specific parts. One part is including brain and spinal cord, and we usually call it central nervous system or CNS. And the rest of the nerves, we call them peripheral nervous system. And actually, they are the nerves that branching out from the CNS to other parts of the body. And the most important thing to consider is that when we go through the details of these neural systems, we have tiny parts called neurons. And in order to understand what's really happening in neurons, we would like to see how neurons would process the information. So in order to see this, I would like just to introduce two main parts of the neurons. We usually have tiny parts called dendrites. They're located around the nucleus and they want to gather the information from other areas. And we also have an axon. That's a long-term, not long part of the neuron, and it's usually responsible for sending the signal that's received through the dendrites to other parts. So the story starts like getting an action potential coming from another neuron. So imagine that you have a kind of hit to your hand, and then this action potential starts to go through the different parts of the neurons, to go through your CNS, and then finally go to your brain. And your brain should analyze that, and the whole story should come back. So the story of sending these information is with action potentials, starting with another neuron, by axons of another neuron, and then the dendrites receive the signals and then try to send the signals, usually through a long ways, for example, starting from our brain into toes. And these action potentials should be repeated. I can say some new action potentials are being made on the way and generated through the axons. And in this way, if everything works perfectly, the signal, a kind of ongoing signal is happening in our body, going to our CNS or coming out of our CNS anyway. And the fact is that in order to have a good transition of the signal, I mean the ongoing signal, we need to be sure that the axons are working properly. And the way that we guarantee such a good work, there are many factors to consider, but one of them is having a healthy myelin sheet. So myelins are responsible for taking care of the signals. And it's a kind of sheet around the axon, somehow taking care that the signal doesn't penetrate out of the axons. And also they can also help generation of the new action potentials while they're going to be somehow slow after passing through a long way. So this is what we have in healthy people, a good myelinated sheet around the nerves. However, the problem happens in multiple sclerosis that these myelin sheets got damaged. So we usually call that MS is a chronic autoimmune disease that affects the central nervous system. So the fact is that we mostly see this problem in CNS, and it is characterized by any kind of inflammation or demyelination and neural loss. Anyway, all of these happen in order to change the way that the signal that we love to see is not that good. So that ongoing signal becomes slowed down, weakens, or stop transmitting properly. And when these all happen for us, we can consider that the person is suffering from multiple sclerosis with seeing a bunch of symptoms. Usually it is starting with vision, and the people might have diplopia or might have optic neuritis, similar aspects. They might feel centrally fatigued. They might have cognitive impairment, depression and anxiety, and an unstable mood. The other parts that are being affected are muscular areas, kind of fatigue and weakness in muscles. Mouth and throat and digestive system can also be affected, and the senses like pain and tingling might happen, and also it can affect the urinary. So all of these symptoms might be considered as symptoms of multiple sclerosis, but the fact is that many of them might happen in other diseases or even in a healthy person. But we need to be sure that these symptoms are related to multiple sclerosis. But the fact is that the other important aspect about multiple sclerosis is that over 2.3 million people worldwide are suffering from the disease, and unfortunately, women might get the disease 2 or 3 times more often than the men. So it is usually considered as a problem mostly associated with women rather than men. And the other problem is that it is usually happening between ages 20 and 40. And well, obviously it impacts the woman during their prime career and family building years. And it can also be affected due to hormonal factors. So any factors like vision changes, period changes, cognitive issues, and fatigue can somehow change like a cosine wave, sometimes really worse during the months or sometimes lessen due to hormonal factors. So when we consider a person with multiple sclerosis, the changes in the CNS are usually difficult to be diagnosed because they are usually damaging, but the damage might come into the symptoms later. I mean, the symptoms might appear years and years after that the person is suffering from multiple sclerosis. So we are looking for a way to detect multiple sclerosis in its earlier stages. And what's the point of this early detection? It actually delays, in the case of the delay to diagnosis, some irreversible damage and faster progression would happen. And otherwise, if we can have some early intervention and start treatment on time, we can slow the disease progression, improve the quality of the life through symptom management, and also reduce long-term healthcare costs. So what we want to do in this project, and we are actually in the process for many years, is that how we can do this early diagnosis using the eye, not only concentrating on CNS itself. The fact is that retina in our eye is kind of outgrowth of the brain. They have very similar structures. They are the same in embryo. So when the person is growing up, they are still connected to each other. And I can say that retina is the only part of the central nervous system that can be seen directly from outside. So we use imaging modalities from the eye in order to capture such information. Ocular imaging modalities might be something like fundus images that you usually see, like these orange images that captured from the end of the eye. However, they don't see what's happening really inside the eye and inside the cells that are really important for us. The other way of seeing inside our eye is optical coherence tomography that provides a kind of cross-sectional information showing different cells to each other, to us, and we can find out what's happening in each cell, in each bunch of cells in the course of disease. If you compare a healthy person with a person with multiple sclerosis, the fact is that their OCTs are not absolutely different. So these subtle differences are even difficult to be diagnosed by an expert. We need to see what's happening inside these cells, so we need to have exact information about individual cells inside the OCT images. So we need a process that we call it segmentation of retinal tissues. And well, if it should be done manually, it's very time consuming and prone to error. And the main step that we started coming into this AI applications was somehow preventing the process from such problems of segmentation. So we can use artificial intelligence because it can work with large volume of data. We can implement quality control in it. We can do segmentation and classification approaches and many other applications that we know about that. So we are interested in sending unknown data from a person or from OCT of people to our algorithms to finally have a kind of probability of being affected by multiple sclerosis. For this aim, we usually start with data collection. We usually have demographic data and also the ocular imaging, including OCTs and also on-face images similar to fundus. So having a kind of database, we go after segmentation process. So we have developed a manual segmentation web app. Ophthalmologists or neurologists help us to do the segmentation. And the algorithm looks and learns how the process of segmentation is happening. And after having a trained algorithm, we expect that we can send our unknown data and the algorithm can give us the location of the boundaries beautifully, so it can be seen in 2D or 3D. The process of these stories actually started when we wanted to prepare an algorithm for clinicians to do the segmentation. However, the fully manual segmentation was very time consuming. So one of our papers published as a kind of semi-automatic method that only needs a few clicks from the clinician so it can do the segmentation with less effort. And then we worked starting on segmentation algorithm, or started the process in 2018 when I was visiting a charity in Germany, a hospital concentrated on multiple sclerosis, and we finalized the algorithm in recent years. So this is a kind of similar to unit algorithms. So it has some structural parts that analyzes the texture and also can extract the overall structure of retina and then the internal retina structure. It has a kind of boundary loss, boundary preservation loss that's more concentrated on boundaries rather than the regions. So finally, training our data on a specific device and specific patients from one country, we showed that it can be generalizable into other diseases, I mean neurologic diseases and other devices, not rather than, for example, Heidelberg, and also the data coming from different countries, so differences in the anatomical features possibly. And the last right column, you can see that the performance of our algorithm is now acceptable for all of these conditions. So having these segmentations, if I go to compare it with the retinal cells inside our eye, I can say that they are actually related into the location of the boundaries between cells. So if I calculate the distances between them, I can prepare a kind of thickness map of retinal layers. So this bunch of retinal thickness maps showing how much of cells are available around our eye can be used as a kind of low dimensional, most relevant representation of the 3D OCT data. That's usually very huge. And we also prepared a bunch of algorithms like pre-processing. For example, we prepared a synthetic data to synthesize healthy multiple sclerosis and a similar disease, neuromyelitis optica. And we showed that using this synthetic data can increase our performance of classification. We also have some algorithms for increasing the quality overall, like reducing the noise of the data. And all these algorithms and segmentation methods can be validated comparing with what we would like to see in actually data, in actual annotated data gathered from clinicians. And the next step is then similar to the previous step. We want to go into a process to be learned from the opticians or our neurologists. So we show a bunch of data to our algorithm. The neurologist knows that if they are coming from multiple sclerosis or healthy people, so our algorithm learns this classification approach, and from now on, the trained algorithm can be used to say the probability of suffering from multiple sclerosis just using into images of the eye. Again, the results can be compared with expert clinicians to say how good is the performance of the algorithms. So one of the works that we published previously is, for example, we gathered the OCT data. As I told you, some on-face images and OCT scans are gathered, and we did some processing steps in order to align them because the registration of these two data sets are also a story for them. And then we started looking into a kind of a feature extraction and using machine learning algorithms like support vector machine, random forest, artificial neural networks based on the extraction of the features from these sections overlaid on each other. The accuracy of something like 86%, I can say, was achieved. I should say that the data sets that I'm reporting on them are not all the same. So for this specific paper, for example, the data set is coming from charity in Germany, but some of them are already gathered in my home country, Iran. So the second approach was like using other methods for extraction of the features. For example, autoencoders, convolutional autoencoders, and more complicated methods were used. We used both SLO images and the thickness maps from the eye in order to extract the features and send them to shallow networks. And then accuracy is somehow increased, showing the good performance of the feature extraction and then the classification approaches. Then we went into the study of applying the images directly into our deep learning algorithms. For example, the channels of the different retinal layers were merged to each other, or instead of seeing the layer thickness, we concentrated on seeing the shape of the layers. And we tried to see what happens if we just mosaic them rather than just putting in on different channels. And use different methods for like transfer learning, deep neural networks from scratch. And we also try to have some external interpretability to see how our findings are similar to what the neurologists would find in seeing these images. So other works, we also showed that this multimodality approach can improve our performance, because when we add the on-face image into these cross-sectional data, the performance was increased, I can say, into 92%, for example. The final approach that we are looking into that was based on the similarity or dissimilarity of the eyes. And the fact is that, as I mentioned, as one of the first steps that happens in the eye, in multiple sclerosis, we usually get a kind of asymmetry between the cells of the eye. And it is already ignored even in the clinicians' approaches. However, we try to implement that in our first effort. It was published 1 year ago, I think, and then we use something like Siamese networks in order to say how the changes in between two eyes can also be impactful in diagnosis of the multiple sclerosis. We also have done some works in order to make our understanding of the multiple sclerosis somehow deeper, rather than just giving some numbers like classification accuracy. For example, we did a work on the vessels coming from the eye, and we extracted some features from the vessels and wanted to know which of these features is more effective and how similar are these effects to what the clinicians would expect from the understanding the vessels of the eye. One similar study that we also had was based on combination of the data coming from OCT and fMRI studies. As you might know, MRI is the most prevalent way of diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And as I told you, it's usually happening somehow late, and symptoms are started when the people are sent to MRI to see the lesions in their brain. However, functional MRI is shown to be more helpful in early diagnosis. And in this work, we showed that small changes in fMRI yield to big changes in OCT. And also for healthy controls, OCT variation is limited than fMRI variation, which makes distinguishing patients easier. So these all show that OCT has a good capability in order to be used as an early diagnosis method, even better than fMRI. We have a bunch of works that are ongoing, actually. For example, on classification, we are looking into foundation models. As you know, there are lots of foundation models available, and I can say 3 are already published last year based on the images of the eye on fundus and OCT. So we used one of them like RedFound and utilized that for our thickness maps. They are not actually trained on thickness maps. They usually are trained on OCT scans or on face images, and thickness map is something very different. So we try to somehow fine-tune the foundation model and then extract the features based on them. So the classification and performance was shown to be increased using these foundation models. We also had a kind of we also prepared a kind of algorithm in order to have a human in loop segmentation, because the fact is that even with the best segmentation method that we love and actually have developed, it is failing in some scans and some patients, and it is very time consuming to go and find what's going on. So in the case that one of the scans are failing, we prepare this algorithm that the clinician can go and correct that specific scan, and the correct scan value can penetrate into other scans in order to solve the problem happening in other segmentation scans. So this is the overall story that I wanted to concentrate on. I know that my time is already finished. I just want to say the overall predicted benefit of using AI diagnosis tool is that we can somehow calculate the probability of having multiple sclerosis, and we can use it in order to make referral decisions. So its benefits to patients and public is early diagnosis, early intervention, and contribution to AI. And its benefit to NHS and community clinicians is optimization of clinical workload, reduced cost of screening, and streamlining the referral process. Thank you so much for providing me the opportunity to share my experience. I just wanted to introduce a bunch of fantastic researchers that I have the privilege of working with them. It is really an honor for me to introduce them. They are coming from different universities and different countries, and thanks for hearing, and I'm happy for any possible questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's an amazing talk. We're going to save questions until the end. So if you have a question, just hold on to it and we'll do both speakers' questions together. And feel free at the end again to put it into the chat or to raise your hand when we get to that stage. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. I'd like now to introduce the second speaker of today's session, which is Yvonne. So Yvonne, feel free to start sharing your screen when you can. And it is an absolute pleasure having Yvonne here with us today. She's a lecturer in engineering at the University of Oxford. And of course, she works a lot with clinical machine learning. And she's also editor of a Nature journal, Women's Health. And she's done lots of work around AI for women's health. So we are looking forward to hearing from you, Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Can you hear me all right? Is the sound?
And we can see your slides as well. Thank you.
Perfect. I just try to see, double check if you see the top of it as well. Shall I move that bar to the bottom?
Yes, we can see, but it's black, yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I can make it more. Okay. Right. Thank you for having me today. I would like to briefly introduce the theme of, or the tune of the talk I'm gonna give today. Because by background, I'm trained as an engineer. I have passion in AI for healthcare. Therefore, I have interdisciplinary research in digital health and to improve people's quality of life. But the talk today will be focusing towards the technology part of AI for health, clinical interpretation, and also have a touch of the computer engineering side of information engineering and machine learning technologies. So the aim that for this particular talk today is to share the knowledge of clinical AI in practice and to introduce a framework to how we can develop AI and clinical machine learning platform to potentially improve women's health, and how we can consider machine learning as a medical device for clinical purpose. And I think that is a particular part I would like to share and hopefully build collaboration with all of you today. And the framework also will have the description of the requirement, including hardware requirement and the metrics we are looking at, the machine learning methodology that is capable based on the current physical barrier, and also how we can implement all of these into consideration to build a platform and provide performance monitoring alongside. And the other aim that if I can reach today is to introduce the current work in the remote monitoring for women with gestational diabetes. And hopefully that is also an area of broad interest. Gestational diabetes is a diabetes during pregnancy. That is how it links with women's health. However, diabetes is also a more systematic problem that not only link with blood glucose, which is like the sugar in the blood, but it also linked with like eye diseases and cardiovascular diseases, and also it will influence a lot of things afterwards. For example, for women and their children. So I hope that in the AIM2, it will not only introduce what has been done for gestational diabetes, but also open a platform for us to think about together what it can do based on what has been done in Oxford and some other colleagues worldwide in this gestational diabetes area, transfer to a much broader AI for women's health area. So let me first crack on what do I mean by clinical AI. So now we are collecting data from all different range of data resources, from electronic health record, from the sensor data we are having at home, at hospital, from smartphone, from all different type of sensors. And also we have laboratory test results from the blood. And there are point of care genomics information that is currently fused into the front end research that may help us to develop new hypotheses and drugs, and so on. Therefore, the main difference from clinical AI and the traditional AI is the translational part of whether we can change it and then make it usable for clinical purpose later on. So there are four main areas in this particular clinical AI domain. One is more or less using for early warning score, which is to say, before an event happens, which is the first line we can see, it tells us the event time. Can we move that line to the front line? Therefore, we can give early treatment, or we can prevent it at early stage, or we can delay that progress of disease. And then the second one is for AI and large language model for health. So in general, it means that if we have methodologies, can we help to build the area that we haven't been explored before and make it transferable for clinical practice, not only in early warning score, but more on the clinical practice. For example, whether we can use AI or large language models to improve the catalog of how things should be happen in the clinical field. So if we have 100 patients, they're all ill, whom shall we see first? Who are the high risk, who are the low risk, and how to improve that service out of all. And the third area is wearable and mobile health, which is really an emerging area that play an important role for AI in women's health and in general, all the AI for health area. We are seeing more and more devices, they are usable at daily basis and collecting the data. But how can we collect those data and use it for clinical decision making? Because personal data and clinical data have a very clear barrier. We're going to talk about it today, have a little touch. And then the last part is really how we can transfer it to the developing world, not only about UK, US, where we have clear regulations and information about what can be done, what should be done in the pipeline, but also for the countries who have less evidence clinically to suggest what are their regulations should be. As an example, if people live in Peru, their blood pressure will be different comparing with people who live in the US, because some of them are living in mountain area, some of them living in the sea level area, but all this information are not really taken into account or even not think of or developed in some countries. So how can machine learning and AI play a role when such a regulation is not in place? We can adjust it and we can improve the quality of life. And traditionally, we will look into how we give treatment when something happens. So the next generation of clinical AI we're looking at is to say, well, before it happened, how can we make it from reactive treatment to preventive medicine? Due to the time today, I involve a lot of slides, but there are a lot of information in the slides. I won't be able to discuss all of them in details. After the meeting, I will share the slides on my personal website, and please feel free to read them if you're interested in any of the details. So now let me crack on into the gestational diabetes and how that ecosystem works. And hopefully that will give us a taste of if we are developing AI for health for women's health or something for home monitoring for women's health, what are the stakeholders in this ecosystem? So in this ring, this figure, there are 3 rings. This is the figure that we published for a review paper for gestational diabetes and machine learning for health. In the inner ring, what we believe that is the central part is the stakeholder of women and the people who are in their home environment. We call it diabetes home monitoring. In that area, we will have all the devices allow us to collect personal information continuously and also the medication information. And after we have that one done, which involve a lot of AI for women's health technologies, what we are going to do is the second ring, which is a light blue ring in the middle, is to how we transfer all the information or the summary of the information to the primary community and hospital care people. Therefore, we can help them to provide in time clinical decision making. And in the middle ring, we will have the primary care, which are the GPs, and community care, which is like the midwife, and the secondary care are the hospital care, which normally refers to people who have to be who have to take medication or who have more than one type of diseases, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, or eye diseases as an example. If they have to be looked after before the pregnancy, then they will be continually being looked after during the pregnancy. We want to share all this information that is relevant. Therefore, we can enable sort of interactive monitoring platform. The outer ring here, we put some hypotheses to say what are the people or what we can do for the general public health and care. So if we see it as AI in women's health or women's health in public health and care, what are the stakeholders here? We think it is important to fuse machine learning and AI to help to build the national screening before and after certain disease in pregnancy or in general women's health. We want to look at the cost and we want to know what other technologies can be involved. We want to provide certificate for those trainings and provide a platform for digital health, and very importantly, follow or help to contribute to the law and regulation and policy. After talking about ecosystem, let's very quickly look through what has been happened for gestational diabetes as an case study or example. So when we collecting data, as we can see in the inner ring, normally we will have sensors or we will have human help to add those information in the platform. In this blood glucose particular case, we will have multiple type of sensors. As innovators for AI in women's health, what we need is data, and how those data are collected are very important, and the types of data are very important too. So for the figure 2 here is the generations of machines for blood glucose collections, and they varies in size, but very importantly, they varies in technical settings and accuracy as well. And there are some modern sensors that use like contact lens and then variable sort of clothes and needle and use a different part of the body. So if we are designing for AI for health, for women's health technologies, how can we take all of these into consideration? And using different type of sensors to help us to make that innovation is really important. And in our particular case, for the blood glucose monitoring, they're different type. So they are continuous ones where they will wear a patch and it will be continually monitored. Or there are ones that is not continuous by fingertip, like they collect at the time when there is an action to it. Or there are certain type is like what we have seen before. They are like the sensors, but they are like the sensors either non-invasive, or they are the sensors that happen as background, but it's not really continuous. So what are the difference of the data? Data is important for AI. So what are the difference for those data and what it means for AI? So we have to look into certain areas. So one is how the data is being collected. Therefore, we can think about errors in time series data and errors in the collection method. And when we do the processing, we'll be able to tell what are the right method for interpretation and missingness correction. Once we have that done, the next pathway is really to how to use the data. We will have continuous data, categorical data, signals. All these data need to be fused. And when we build a foundation model, we can put them in, but it's very important these data are cleaned. How can we make sure these data are accurate and accurate in a way of not manipulating it in a clinical perspective. That is really one of the challenges we are facing in clinical AI. So here is a table of the stakeholders in the AI for gestational diabetes. What are the devices in the market in different countries? These may not be particularly directly relevant for the general AI for health, but I think what is important to emphasize here is different countries have different culture, different countries have different preference of type of interventions, not only in clinical part, but also in daily health monitoring. Therefore, for women's health, if we want to design something that fit for the global market, then we have to look into the culture differences and genomic differences and even the food differences, because people are living in a very different area, eating very differently. They have different cultures. So how can we interpret all of this into our consideration? And all of these type of apps design more or less the same, of providing some of the functions they feel is important to them. So it is also very interesting for us to take it away as when we are designing new innovations for AI for women's health, then what are the key functions that require and what is the business model behind it? Although that is not a research content, but I think it is really important for us to think about it at the time of designing. Therefore, we can make it into a better position when we try to create real life impact and commercialize it. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about what has been done for the machine learning methodology part and what that what that means for the next stage. So this figure is giving us the summary of the algorithm currently in use for gestational diabetes for blood glucose monitoring. As said before, things evolve very fast. So these are just some general information of what has been done. But there will be more to come. So one type, because it's clinical AI, is for health and for particular type of disease that we know some of the mechanism underneath, we'll be able to build the physiology model. That means we can inform the machine learning, something we know about, and also we can use a hybrid approach to combine that with machine learning model to give the explainability. And the other type is the machine learning models we will look into in the next few slides. So this one is an example that we use the hybrid model based on what we know from the biology part, biochemistry part, with some machine learning information to give an active loop in providing decision making. And the second one that I'm putting here as an example is how we use something similar to deep learning model, like a multi-layer network deep learning model, to provide that combination of different information and fuse them into a way that is jointly able to provide a decision making. And one thing that is worth mentioning here is that when we're looking at transformer models, when we're looking at diffusion models, they are all very trendy. But the real thing is what they tell us in the real life settings and what is really we are doing that making a real impact to the people's life. And that involving cost, computational cost, device cost, and what is the feasibility of using such an advanced model. The next one is very popular for the time series data, which is the long-short memory model, which is a traditional RNN model that looking into the time series data in the blood glucose monitoring and prediction. So they can predict the next few hours of what is the blood glucose likely to be. And this one is a reinforcement learning model that look into how they can use reinforcement learning to continue learn the situation, therefore give a better decision that can be used for the pump for blood glucose as an example. So this is what we have done in Oxford. So we have an ongoing project for gestational diabetes for women's health that is built on a device that we commercialized in 2018. Now it's currently used in more than 60 hospitals in the UK and cover half of the population in England for pregnant women who have gestational diabetes. So the stage one of the work we have done is after we launched the product, we collect the data from Oxford and we build a cesarean section risk score. Therefore, we can mimic a simple way to say who should have the C-section before the birth is being given, so that we can reduce the risk of emergency C-section. And the second stage we start to build machine learning models to see how we can use risk stratification to improve the outcomes. In the particular case for stage 2.1 and 2.2, we are looking at blood glucose only. And 2.3 was the figure I showed you before. We want to build a ecosystem, thanks to the help from IEE Standard Committee. We want to see what it can be achieved and what it can be expanded. And in the next stage, what we decided to do is, after we knowing that what can be done, what we will be able to transfer. So the stage 3.1 was to use transformer models to looking into each outcome prediction and joint outcome prediction. And 3.2 was using the clustering method to see the patient phenotype for time series data using a number of methodologies. And we are trying to give clinical meanings behind each model. And the 3.3 is how we can use large language model and the meta-learning mechanism helping us to build the agent system to allow us to provide a hybrid modeling platform. Therefore, when we have informations coming in, we can gradually build not only about the model of a disease, but also transfer it to a digital twin for individuals. So those are the work we have done and or we are doing at the moment. But in general, the methods that we are using for blood glucose predictions are the traditional models, as we can see in most of the other machine learning fields for health. But we are hoping that in the future, we can build a foundation model for it, because at the moment, it's not that yet. And that is due to the limitation of data we have in this particular case. Due to time, again, I will very likely touch the evaluation and the standard. The evaluation is really the key for us to tell and for us to provide the trustworthiness of the model. But there are many ways that they are just for publication. But what does it mean to real life settings? I think that is yet to be tested. But in general, we will have the methodology for looking into the classification, regression, and NLP-related tasks using the well-known evaluation measure as listed here. And but there are certain tasks we have to continue working on them, is really to understand that what is the risk behind and what else we can do by combining clinical machine learning, medication, treatment plan, and in this particular case, making a low-cost system, helping people with diabetes in their pregnancy to have a better outcome, short-term and long-term. For the AI regulation part, what we would like to try to achieve is when we collect the data, we follow the regulation. Therefore, when we are using our model, it's already giving us the assurance that it will allow us to update the model in the machine learning in operation approach. There are certain regulations in the EU, but because you have left EU, makes things really complex. But in general, if we use the EU one as a guideline, what it means is we have to emphasize for our AI for women's health example, what are the risks in the system? So in EU AI regulation, they have the low and high and medium, like unacceptable high risk and limited minimal risk AI system. And what it means to our design is really a key for researcher or engineer to build it from the very beginning to decide what can be achieved. Therefore, we can make the best of our innovation. And in conclusion, I would like to suggest that there are a lot of clinical AI needs, including the data-centered AI and how to handle high-dimensional, longitudinal, and time series data. We need to take the operation into our consideration, which means machine learning operations, large language modeling operations, and foundation modeling operations. And there are a lot of challenges in this pipeline, which is like data, whether we have data. But very importantly is even we have the data, how we can handle the data, make it ready for the machine learning or AI model we want to use continuously to help and also to give the adjustment as per required. And we have followed AI ethics and regulation. Well, I will leave the slides as the last one to say, well, do we think we are good enough to replace human to this role and then use machine learning and AI to improve humans' health? I presume so, in a certain way that if we all work together based on what we know and try to build new research areas, but what are the risks behind? And thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to just quickly thank all my collaborators for helping me to build up this journey. And if you are interested in any of the work or would like to collaborate, please do reach out. I'm now going to stop sharing my slides so that
Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was such a comprehensive talk, and I learned so much from both talks. And it's actually a pleasure to have you both share your research with us, because I think the two talks were brilliant. So thank you so much. And I would like to invite the audience to ask questions to our speakers, whether that's in the chat or by raising your hand. So I'm just going to open the chat to see if there's any question. Otherwise, I will start myself. Yes, I think there is a question. So let's start with, actually, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question directly. So I think Jugnu Rahi, sorry for your for misspelling your or mispronouncing your name. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. Thanks, Bianca. And thank you. Good stab at the name. It's Jugnu Rahi. So thank you, Yvonne. Fantastic talk. I had a question for Rahele, actually. Thank you, lovely talk. And I know David Steele very well, one of your clinical collaborators. I'm an ophthalmologist at Great Ormond Street and an epidemiologist at the Institute of Child Health. So the questions were, firstly, it's always very tempting to diagnose disease as early as possible if there are early treatments. But what I wanted to know was, are your models predicting somebody might have MS at a stage that's even earlier than one would actually treat? And if so, how do we use that information? It touches on Yvonne's comments about the ethics around it and how basically empowering people rather than labeling them with something that one then can't do anything about. That was my first question. And the second question was around sex differences, because we know that astounding paper from the Google DeepMind team that told us that, that we as ophthalmologists know the sex of a patient because we're examining them, but apparently you can tell it from their fundus image, which is amazing. So I wondered what your models were telling us about the differences because of the gender differences, sex differences in MS risk. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for wonderful questions. And the fact is that, just first starting from your first question, is that this is something that we love to do in order to have the diagnosis earlier than the symptoms would start. At the moment, the data sets that I presented in these slides were all people with diagnosed multiple sclerosis, but we had different bunch of studies. A few of them were based on the data from patients who are diagnosed, but the treatment is not already started on them. And a bunch of them are for people who are under treatment for a while. But the fact is that the CS people, who are mostly considered as people with higher possibility of getting multiple sclerosis, are the people that we should start with them for this process. In the UK, I have just started working with Axel Tetzel, who is actually one of the main people who are interested in OCT application in multiple sclerosis. In the UK, unfortunately, we don't have such a great data set of people who might have the incident of multiple sclerosis in next years, or a kind of follow-up data. That's the best way of seeing this question. But my collaborators in Germany, that I had on my last slide, and actually the main person is Friedemann Powell, and he is in the Charity Hospital in Berlin. And they are the biggest center concentrated on multiple sclerosis and neuromyelitis optica. And they have a huge follow-up data that is the main thing that we are going to work on it. Therefore, having the people's OCT data from a few years ago and having their being diagnosed now is something that can be really helpful in this process. To be honest, we haven't yet started this project, and we have applied for many grant applications to get the needed fund for this. But the works that we had with the charity hospital were mostly on the data of the patients who are already diagnosed, but it is a wish to do that. Talking about what can be done with the patients and the ethical and also the what is related to law actually in this aspect is something that I am already exploring, and I'm in close contact with in Durham University with a law school. So two people in law school that are interested in AI law and also in bioethics are working with me on this. And as you said, it is a very complicated question to answer from both the way that we give the feedback to patients and also the steps that could be done practically. These are actually, I can say, open questions at the moment, and I really don't have any answer to them. I really hope that I come with an answer very soon. For a second question, yes, absolutely correct. We have a project at the moment. Its name is already OCT Age, so its name doesn't show the sex in it. And in that project, it is funded by the MRC. We are in main goal. We are looking on how the OCT changes with age and how the changes in OCT can be affected by different diseases. But in order to do this, the first step that we did was considering what is the changes in age of OCT with men and women. So we found that, yes, as you have seen in many published papers from fundus images, we showed that OCT is also capable of this discrimination. So it has an effect on the way that we consider any changes in OCT. And on the other hand, rather than only looking into age, into sex, the age is also important, because when we are looking into multiple sclerosis, for example, we are expecting a kind of thinning in retinal layers that can also be happening due to aging. And it is important to consider the age and the sex as somehow, I can say, confounding factors in order to consider this. At the moment, we have many different methods to deal with that. The easiest way is just considering these as input to our algorithms. However, we are preparing causal AI algorithms that want to see how is the effect of aging and also sex on the outcomes of our algorithms. It is not only related to multiple sclerosis. We are actually at the moment concentrating on glaucoma and AMD.
Yeah.
And it is exactly something on its way. Again, I'm sorry to say that I don't have any solid answer to give you at the moment, but we are actually working on them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And there's another question for you, but I would like to jump in and ask a question myself to Yvonne. I really think there's a lot to take away from your talk, and you touched upon so many different things. So I'm not going to, repeat what you said, but the things that stuck with me were your emphasis on the holistic approach of not just because it's a multi-stakeholder context, and that's very often the case in clinical AI, and the fact that you emphasized the process in which we extract and process the data. And I think that's so valuable, because in my field, at least, I see in the literature that that's not always reported. And it's probably one of the biggest methodology gaps that I see. So I wanted to just ask you a little bit to perhaps develop what you discussed in the slides about the challenges at the very end, because I think these could be very much relevant to other fields as well. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing a common interest, which I totally agree. So I would like to give a very short case study for this one. So there's one company called Human Health, and what they have done is they work with Google to create a FDA-approved Class 2B platform, and that really link with the data collection, data processing, and enterprise clinical AI pipeline. So what it means is when they collect the data, they want to collecting the data in the way that is trustworthiness. That means they summarize the data in the continuously manner, and they have the address of the understandable missingness and how they are being interpreted. And in the processing of generative AI, it's not about the generative AI itself. It is because the data was being collected and updated into a documented way that is following the current, for example, there are a few framework for clinical data like HL7. They are following certain standard. Therefore, when they are doing the AI technique on the top of it, they will only need to focus on what that AI machine learning model is doing to change the characteristic and the pattern of the data by summarizing what has been done and summarizing the characteristic and summarizing the pattern to make it really innovative. And in that pipeline, what it means is if you have the approval and ready for the market, it can be updated really quickly without the barrier of apply for the approval again from FDA. And for that collection part, it is not something that new. It's about what we know, how we can do it. So I totally agree. It's an area that we should all look into and try to build on, because at the moment it's really fundamental, like using moving forward and an average. Is there anything else we can do? For women's health, certain sensors need to be really small and certain things need to be variables. They are signals. Can we use something more advanced or less advanced on analog signals or on anything with quantum, something more advanced, something less complex, and just make it happen? That is a new area to come. But I totally agree. That is also an area that we are looking at the moment.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. And I think we could talk about this for a long time, but unfortunately we're running out of time. And there's one last question for you, Rahele, but I am sorry to say that you might want to reply by email if possible and take this further outside of this talk because we have to wrap up now. I just wanted to share with everyone that on top of having these great discussions online, we're actually having our first in-person event this year, and I'm going to share with you, it's going to happen in Cambridge. I'm going to share with you the website link, obviously, if I can find it. It is on the 5th of June, so not right now, but the website is already available, and we will open the registration for this event pretty soon. So you're all very welcome to join this event, and as always, we will continue doing our online talks. It's a termly event, so this should happen around the International Women's Day in March, and we would love to see many of you there. And once again, oh, sorry, sorry, thank you, Emma. This event in Cambridge is hybrid, so it's not just in person, but it's our first time doing also an in-person part of it. So as I said, you're very welcome to join both. And once again, I'd like to thank our speakers for this very interesting session. I learned so much, and I really want to continue these conversations also outside of this event. So thank you very much for sharing your work and for joining today.